Alright, today we are replacing the timing cover gasket and water pump on this 1989 Ford Mustang. It seems like a pretty intimidating job, but we'll show you it's not as bad as it sounds. We got all our parts from autopartsdirecttoyou.com. They saved us a bunch of money there. So we're going to go ahead and get started on it. Alright, first thing we need to do is just break the bolts loose on our fan. We do have another video of actually replacing the whole fan. So we're going to go ahead and get the fan off, and we'll move on to our next step. Okay, we got our fan and fan shroud off. Next thing we have to do on this is remove the air conditioning and power steering bracket so that we have access to the water pump and then the timing cover. So what we'll do is just take off the nuts and bolts that hold this large bracket off. We have all the nuts and bolts off of this bracket. It should just come right off now. There it goes. We'll just set that aside. I also meanwhile got the coolant draining, because you want to go ahead and drain all the coolant. It keeps less of a mess when you finally do take off that timing cover. One other thing I'm going to do right now, I'm going to set aside all the bolts that hold on that bracket. So we're going to end up with a lot of nuts and bolts, and we want to be able to keep track of what goes where. So I'm going to set these all aside in a single group along with the bracket. Okay, now you can see we have access to the water pump. The power steering pump is actually just hanging there. If it's in your way, you can just slide it off this stud here and move it out of your way. But right now it's alright. Next step, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect the small heater hoses going to the water pump here. Before I take off these heater hoses, I'm going to go ahead and just take off this belt tensioner to give us a little more access to the heater hoses. There's just one 19mm bolt on the back of this. I'm sorry, a nut. So let's go ahead and take that off. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and get these heater hoses off of here. Alright, we're going to go ahead and take off the lower radiator hose. And lastly, I'm going to take off the crankshaft pulley. Not the balancer yet, but I'm going to start by taking off the crankshaft pulley. There's 4 bolts on the inside of here. They're pretty much impossible to see, so you have to do it all by feel, but there's 4 bolts in there I'll be taking off now. Okay, we got the crankshaft pulley off. Again, I'm going to set the 4 bolts with it and set it aside. Next thing I'm going to do is go ahead and get the harmonic balancer out of the way. That's probably one of the more intimidating steps of this job, but with the right tools, it's actually not too bad at all. Inside here, there's a large bolt. I believe it's a 15/16 socket. Best way to do it is if you have access to air tools, you want to use an impact wrench to get that off because it's usually pretty tight. So I'm going to go ahead and try to get that pulley, or I'm sorry, the bolt off that pulley. Alright. You just want to be careful when you're taking it off that you don't back into the radiator and hurt the radiator. So All right, there's our large crank bolt. So set that aside for now. Now we've got to pull the harmonic balancer off. This is actually somewhat pressed onto the crankshaft. I'm going to show you a tool. This tool we actually got as a loaner tool you can get from any of your local auto parts stores. It's made specifically for pulling harmonic balancers off. All right, we've got our puller on here. They're all gonna, every car you set up a little bit different. Basically, once you get it on there, you just start slowly tightening the center bolt here, and you'll see it's pulling the balancer right off. This is our harmonic balancer. So I just want to set this aside. You don't need this puller apparatus on here anymore, so we're going to go ahead and take that off. Now we're going to go ahead and take off the water pump bolts and get this water pump out of our way. Okay, you might have noticed that I'm not actually removing any of these bolts all the way. The reason for that is that on these Ford 5.0 motors, they're all a little bit different length on these water pumps. So I'm going to keep them all in their holes until I absolutely have to remove them, just so I don't get them mixed up. All right, at this point the water pump should come right off. See here, here's our old water pump, looking pretty crusty. So even though this wasn't leaking, we're going to go ahead and replace this for the customer because, well, as you can tell, it looks really old. It might even be original. It still says Ford on there. So go ahead and set that out of the way with the bolts still in it. Now you can finally get a good clear shot of the timing cover, which is this piece right here. The coolant leak was actually coming, it's almost impossible to see, but it's right up all the way. There you go. Right up in this corner right here was just leaking coolant really badly. So we're gonna go ahead and pull off this timing cover and replace the gasket in there. Sometimes you do end up having to replace the whole timing cover, but this customer is hoping to be able to salvage the old one, so we'll see what we can do. All right, now we're going to take off this bolt. I'm underneath the car now. We're going to take off this bolt that holds the engine ground strap, and it's also got a little bracket that it holds in place. We're going to take this off so that we have better access to, there's a couple oil pan bolts that we need to remove also. So we'll get this off. Pull the ground strap in this bracket, just kind of poke them out of the way. Next, from underneath the car, we'll take off these. There's 4 oil pan bolts that we need to take off. All right, we're going to start. We got 4 oil pan bolts to remove. These all go straight up into the bottom of the timing cover, so they have to come off. I'll show you our timing cover gasket kit in just a bit, and you'll see that it comes with, it's a pretty innovative way they do it. I'll explain that when we get to that. So for now, we'll just take these 4 off. Now it's speed up time. Am I on the right one?
I don't know. My arm's in the way.
My arm is in the way?
Yeah.
Okay. I can't even see it, so. Is that all you're seeing is my arm?
That's better now.
All right. We've got the 4 bolts out of the bottom. Now we only have a couple more in the front. For that, we'll go back up top. We'll remove those, and the whole timing cover should come right off. All right, now we're going to take off the rest of these timing cover bolts. You'll see there's a few more remaining. Once we get those off, we'll just pry that thing off of there. There's a couple hidden back here, which you have to get with a wrench. They're a little tricky to get to. I'll deal with those in a minute. These are actually a lot easier to get to if you remove the thermostat housing. But I was trying to do a shortcut and not do that, but we'll see if it pays off in the end. If we can just get it broke loose enough, should be able to unthread it by hand. I forgot I had this old wrench that I actually custom bent just for as a distributor wrench, and it's gonna work perfect for this. So let's get this up in here. Yeah. Now, you see the timing cover is loose. At this point, you don't want to pull the gasket out from up here. I'll show you in a bit. We're going to cut this. Well, actually, I'll cut it right now. I just got to get it. Oh, there we go. Okay, timing cover is off. Now, this thing was leaking coolant from this corner. Well, you can see that gasket's just completely shot. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up, and we're gonna clean up these gasket surfaces. Could use a new timing chain, but we'll deal with that later. All right, so now we're just gonna clean it all up. I'm gonna show you what we need to do is slice this gasket off. Let me get the new one, I'll show you. The timing kit, or the timing cover gasket kit, actually comes with new corner gaskets designed so that you can actually cut that old gasket. Well, it needs to be trimmed, but you can cut the old gasket and replace it with this cork one, just so you don't have to pull off the entire oil pan. So we'll go ahead and get that all cleaned up now. All right, well, we've got the timing cover off. We're gonna go ahead and replace the front main seal. Our timing cover kit comes with a new one anyway, so may as well put it in there. It wasn't leaking, but after mess with it and taking that balancer off, it very well might start leaking. Usually it'll pry right out. Alright, I went ahead and got the old seal out. I ended up putting it on this board here and knocking it through with a hammer. Now to get the new one in, I just put a real thin bead of RTV silicone on there. We're just going to line it up and real gently tap it into place. Alright, right now I'm test fitting our gasket, making sure all the bolt holes line up. I'm going to pull it back off and put some sealant on the back of this thing. You can see we've got the surface all cleaned up where that gasket's going to lay. I've also pre-trimmed the corners for the oil pan gasket. You can see here, one's going to go there, and the other is going to go right there. And we'll glue those in place before we put everything back together. Right now I'm going to go ahead and put some sealant on the back of this thing, and I'll come back and line it all back up. Alright, got our sealant on the back of this thing. I just used a can of spray red RTV gasket sealant. It's a high tack sealant. It'll make everything hold right in place. Just going to go around and press everything down. Alright, we're going to let that sit there and dry a little bit. Meanwhile, I'm going to put my oil pan gasket in place. Alright, now on these corners where you're going to be putting your new oil pan gasket corners, you want to use a lot of sealant, because originally, the motor was designed, I'm going to put it on my finger and then smear it on there. The motor was designed to have one big gasket there, but putting these little corner pieces is kind of a shortcut. So what we'll do is put one healthy sized glob there. Now I'm also going to put some on the bottom side of the... I'm shaky. Why am I shaky? Wow. Wow. I'm old and shaky, Shay. Before that dries, I'm going to just put the bolts in there to let it... I'm going to put the bolts in backwards just so the bolt holes stay lined up. Alright, we're going to go ahead and replace the seal along the bottom of this. I'm just going to test fit it first. And I'm going to put a real small bead of silicone sealant in there. Alright, now I'm going to go ahead and apply quite a bit of silicone right to these corners. It's a notorious spot for oil to leak, so a little extra sealant won't hurt anything. And at this point, one last thing I'm going to do is spray some of my spray-on sealant on the back side of this cover, and we'll be ready to put it on. Alright, we got our sealant on the back of this thing. We got all our extra RTV in place. Now, we're going to really carefully slide this over the crankshaft. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but the gasket shifted a little bit, so I'm going to get underneath it and try to line this up and get these bolts started. Okay, we've got our bolts that we can tighten down all tight on our timing cover. Now I got my water pump, I got some sealant on the back gasket here. What I'm going to do now is just transfer these bolts over one at a time from the exact holes they came out of. And this is where leaving them in the old water pump comes in handy, because you then know exactly which hole they go in. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and put our gasket on here for the water pump. There. Now we'll go ahead and put our new water pump on the timing cover. Next, I'm just going to go around and tighten down all these bolts. Alright, I got all our bolts tight on the water pump. Next thing we're going to do is put the balancer back on. Really should have done that before the water pump, but it's alright. You want to line it up with its keyway. Then just slide it on as far as you can by hand. And you should be able to get your bolts started. And once you tighten that down, you'll see it pull itself all the way onto the crankshaft. Balancer's on and tight. Now we'll put our crankshaft pulley back on. I'm going to get one bolt through here. And get it started. And then I'll line it up and the other three will go right in. Alright, we got our crankshaft pulley on. Right now I'm just sliding our heater bypass hoses back on. And I'm just going to start putting everything back together how it was. Alright, next we're going to get our big accessory bracket back on. Now the power steering pump currently moves, so you got to kind of twist it and get it all lined up as we're putting it on. There she goes. Okay. Now we'll just go ahead and tighten all these down. Alright, we've got our accessory bracket back on. We've got all our hoses on. Still got no, I did tighten that one. That was tight. Pretty much all I got left to do is put our water pump pulley and then our fan and shroud back on, fill her up with coolant, get our belt back on, and it's good to go. So we're going to knock that out real fast. All we have to do now is fill up the coolant. We're also going to need to give it a quick oil change because we did get a little bit of coolant down into the oil. But hard part's done, and that's pretty much a wrap. That's how you replace the timing cover gasket water pump. It's also how you would replace the harmonic balancer. A whole bunch of jobs got covered in this one. So again, thanks to our friends at autopartsdirectu.com for getting us a cheap price on the parts. And other than that, that is a wrap. Thank you for watching.